Hello and welcome to this Business Channel special on trading with the BRIC countries. Now, if you do business internationally and you're not in these markets, then you'll want to be. So let's start off by finding out the what, the why and the how.
The BRIC countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and they were put together, I think, as a means of drawing attention to the huge opportunities that exist in these emerging markets. For UK exporters, traditional exports will tend to have been Europe and the United States, for example, and elsewhere in the developed world. But the really high-growing economies of the future, rapidly growing middle classes, rapid growth rates, they tend to be the BRICS and other countries, of course, in Asia, Africa and the Gulf and elsewhere in South America.
Increasingly, China, India, Brazil and Russia, probably roughly in that order, is a very significant market, not least for the demand for aircraft and the demand for defence equipment, but also because they have national ambitions to create their own supply industry, particularly in aerospace.
Well, some time ago, sir, we as a company decided that we needed to look way beyond our current home markets. And the BRIC countries offers us opportunities to demonstrate our skills in things like Olympics and major sporting venues. We've been heavily involved in places like Russia for the last 6 years, and we are currently involved in China, Brazil, and we're starting to make inroads into India.
We've worked in Brazil, Russia, India and China now for quite some time, and on a range of very exciting projects. What's been quite interesting is that the companies that have come to us from those sorts of countries are usually quite visionary. They're looking for something very different. They don't want to just come up to the mark of their competitors. They want to surpass them. And we find that they normally have to do that, really, to be noticed.
The City of London, one of the world's great financial centres. Here they trade UK exports to the traditional developed markets such as the US and Europe, but now these have slowed. British companies are also looking at growing markets, and they don't come with much more potential than BRIC.
Opportunities today for British manufacturing companies do exist. There comes a proviso with that, however. These patterns are constantly subject to changes in political circumstances, so perhaps a change in government policy, economic circumstances. We're subject to currency valuations. We're subject to environmental impact. We have the issue of natural disasters that may detrimentally affect trade patterns for one reason or another.
I think if you look at the world economy now, you will see that many of the developed markets are on a slow growth trajectory as they recover from the recession. They've returned to growth, but that will be relatively modest for the next few years, whereas the emerging economies didn't really suffer the world recession to anything like the same extent as the developed world. And those that saw a small dip, in many cases, they returned to these very rapid growth rates. So I think that the changes are very, very significant indeed.
And I applaud the government's recent revival of trade links, particularly with Russia and particularly with Brazil. I had the opportunity of going with the Deputy Prime Minister down to Brazil and with the Prime Minister to Moscow just recently. And I think the response is really interesting. In both cases, both countries, Brazil and Russia, are saying, well, we would love to have a closer trade relationship with Britain.
With China in particular, there's a growth in the middle class sector. As a concomitant to that, there is higher demand for high-end products. High-end products are often manufactured in the West, namely Britain, Europe. So opportunities for such companies do exist. And of course there are issues as far as security is concerned, and terrorism, organised crime, corruption are all areas that need consideration.
There will be more cross-border trade in the future because I can see that the Chinese government is promoting that. they would like to have more investments overseas, and at the same time they encourage investment into China.
The interest that UK companies have in China is and will remain very strong. China itself is a very exciting and dynamic market that UK companies want to be a part of. So I for my part, foresee that the current trends will continue.
The Bric countries are all far away and geographically challenging. Distances, populations, the scale and size of the markets can be daunting. So is trading with these countries only for larger international conglomerates, or can SMEs operate successfully there too?
I'm often asked whether these high-growth markets are only for bigger companies, and the short answer is no. We're seeing small companies having real successes. I met a man one night and he took out of his pocket a component for the automotive industry and told me that on his first trip to China he'd sold 1 million of them. So that's an example of the huge scale of opportunities. But it is really important that smaller companies get expert advice, and that's what my organisation can give.
Small suppliers can succeed, but they have to be very determined, very patient, very forward-thinking, and usually either have to have the backing of large companies or the nation government. And that's one of the issues for us at the moment. In particular with China, you've got the language issues, but any of those countries. India, we clearly have very strong historical trading links with Britain, and therefore on the surface it's much easier to do business there. So that's probably the easiest of the four. Brazil is very much an Italian, French and German marketplace and trading place, so to break in there, you've got to find a route in if you're a smaller company. Clearly the large companies can choose. Rolls-Royce have been very active in China for 25 years and have been very active in Russia for many decades, so they're already present, but the smaller to medium-sized companies have a real challenge in breaking through in those markets. Simply because of the patience required, very often having to spend 4 or 5 years of effort to break into these markets at least.
I think that is a perception in the marketplace that China is for the big boys. I can say categorically it isn't just for the big boys. We work with SMEs day in, day out. It's about 80% of the businesses that we help at a practical level every day. And I see SMEs doing good business much more quickly perhaps than some of the larger companies are able to do. This is partly because smaller companies aren't so much on the radar screen, they don't have such big projects, so they can get on with things if they find the right partner in China. So it's a market for anybody who's got the passion, tenacity and patience to deal with what is a complicated marketplace.
Large projects have a huge potential for errors, problems, hold-ups, overruns and miscommunication. Yet UK companies are successfully undertaking major contracts in Bric countries as well as here.
The Olympics is a great example. If we take the Olympics in London, it's a great story. You know, the whole Olympics here is being delivered under budget, well ahead of program. All the main facilities are already completed. So it's a great experience to pass on to somebody like Sochi, who are having the Winter Olympics in 2014, trying to not only use that core expertise and experience, but go forward with new ideas. Part of the Olympic ethic is to create a transfer of knowledge, transfer of experience from previous Olympics. So we always partner with the local team, and we like to think that that team benefits from our experience in a very collaborative way. So by creating that situation, you are effectively not only making the thing in Bric, but you're now being able to create through the service industries the clear distinction that here is something which in the future could well be designed and made in Bric countries, and why shouldn't it be?
I think we should be constantly preparing for the worst case scenario, and that's where risk assessment comes into its own. Prepare for the worst. If the worst happens, then so be it, but you have measures in place to counter the effects of that worst case scenario.
All businesses take measures to protect their investments, and this is no different when guarding against piracy targeted at cargo ships.
This all comes under the prevention is better than cure adage, I think. This is where companies can put in place real policies for dealing with the unexpected. Although, of course, it's not unexpected, these are foreseeable eventualities, and it's about putting in place measures that can deal with these foreseeable situations. Now, that can come in the form of in-country consultations and analyses. That can come in the form of embedded consultants within your operations, constantly assessing the changes that are taking place on the ground and the impact that those changes have on the company. That can come, of course, in the form of physical protection. These are all preventative measures, and shipping is one example where physical protection services are being provided, but that is the final stage in the process. Before that, there is a need for a general risk consultancy. There is then a need to survey the assets and the potential for these assets to be subject to perhaps piracy in the case of shipping, or a terrorist attack in the case of an oil and gas installation in the Yemeni desert.
Protecting investments can also include setting up escrow accounts to ensure bills are paid as agreed.
In the case of a straightforward acquisition, escrows are used perhaps if there is a warranty on tax or something which has to be satisfied, and then the remainder of the consideration is held by us pending release. It might be in the case of a joint venture where we can put together some special share trust arrangements to provide protection against insolvency. It could be an employee share trust to keep incentivized key members of the team. There's a whole range of services that can be provided to solve practical or possibly regulatory problems.
Local knowledge is key when dealing with China and the other BRIC countries, but should companies open a local office and employ local people, or partner with a local firm?
Well, that depends on the scale of the project. And if you take a project like the Nanjing Youth Olympic Master Plan that we're currently doing in China, that is a project of such a scale that we have actually opened a small office now in Shanghai. And obviously the aim is that after this project, it will hopefully lead to projects moving on after that. But there are other projects which are of a smaller scale, and in that case we tend to sort of work with local partners rather than necessarily opening a local practice.
And Tom, it's fair to say in Brazil we've been able to do the Natal Stadium project by coming and going, as it were. And that's very similar to our process in Sochi in Russia, where we have very strong local partners, and we're able to drop in on a weekly basis and not only collaborate with them, but obviously make sure that the quality of the drawings and design is maintained.
All businesses face challenges, but these can be doubled when dealing with different cultures and protocols. There are particular issues when dealing with the BRIC countries.
The main challenges of breaking in are twofold. One, a commitment, I've already said, of years. British companies tend to have a bit short-term attitude to things. If things aren't working within a year, then let's abandon and go somewhere else. For these marketplaces, you've got to show commitment, and very often, China in particular, you have to show commitment over a long period of time and demonstrate an interest in the people rather than the product.
I think there can be many ways in which things can go wrong. A very common mistake is companies almost leaving their brains behind when they first go out to China. They see a huge opportunity and they jump in with 2 feet and don't do the due diligence that they would do anywhere else in the world. So that is possibly the most common mistake, is sort of rushing in before really checking out things as you would elsewhere.
Our aerospace industry is scattered all through Britain, so anywhere from Aviemore to Bristol to Derby to London, South Coast, Southampton. a lot of those companies, the smaller ones, have to get used to the idea of hiring nationals on the ground in those countries rather than just being an export base or just being a sales base from the old British Empire days where you went around the world in the Commonwealth and sold on the back of your Britishness. You have to adopt and adapt and hire locally.
Another common mistake is perhaps working with a partner rather too quickly who ultimately doesn't end up being the right partner for you. So very carefully choosing your partner is incredibly important. A lot of Chinese potential partners perhaps will oversell their capability. So again, it comes back to due diligence and checking out, are they the right people?
You're going to a country that operates very differently at many different levels. So no matter how experienced you are in your home market, don't assume that you can behave in just the same way in China. I would strongly suggest that UK companies going to China receive the appropriate professional advice locally, and that way I would hope and expect that they will avoid making what might be costly mistakes.
Getting the right people on your own team is also critically important. If it's expats from the UK, they need to find a way to work in the Chinese environment. It can be frustrating, there's a lot of red tape. So you have to have people who've got a genuine passion for the country, because otherwise they'll get turned off quite quickly. Equally, it's very important to find the right Chinese people, people that you can trust, that you can grow as your business grows. So that's also a very critical issue. And I think another important part is ensuring that you build the right relationships with key stakeholders. The Chinese government is very important to all aspects of the business, so forging good relations with the local authorities is also critically important.
Well, it depends where we're working in the world. I mean, we don't have any UK clients at all. It's all export. It could be United States. We're very strong in Brazil, working with Embraer, another aircraft manufacturer, and TAM, the national carrier. So it depends on where we are in the world, but communication is absolutely key. And for anyone wanting to export to a BRIC country, it's staying in there and a consistency and not expecting to win business immediately. You're in there for the long term and building relationships.
Some of the biggest challenges is with a lot of companies that are really not used to using designers but are very enthusiastic, and that really has been down to communication. So whenever you're working on a large program like these, and also maybe with companies that are not as experienced at new developments as some of more established brands in Europe, so it's very important to keep really a lid on what's happening and how it's all going in terms of the project itself. So what tends to happen, what we do is that the designers are really a very good focus for the whole program. So we're working really as the hinge pin between the suppliers, the designers and the company. So keeping it all really together. So that's one of the key things. And I think the other thing is really making the most out of the cultural aspects of the project. Obviously, design is very much an area which is now homogenized. There's global, and companies really want to find something that really differentiates them from their competitors.
International buyers are sold on the idea of buying British, but reputation alone doesn't make an export strategy. There's a lot of help available for companies breaking into the BRIC markets.
My advice to companies considering the BRIC markets is absolutely, first of all, yes, they should consider them. No company can afford to ignore these rapidly growing markets. And the second advice I would give is use UKTI services. We have staff in 96 markets around the world. Many of them are locally engaged staff. They really know the market. Use our services.
Well, I think probably the first thing I would say to anybody who's interested in learning more about how we can help is have a look at the website of CBBC, www.cbbc.org. That has got a wealth of information about modern China. It's a tremendous resource for people to go at, and most of that information is free of charge. If companies are serious about China, then looking at membership of CBBC, I think, is a very sensible thing to do. It gets you plugged into all of the China-related activity that is taking place in the UK, and also to network with other British companies who are in a similar boat. So learning from them, I think, is also very important.
It's full of challenges, clearly, financial challenges and different methods of working, different business ethics. We've found that it's a case of taking it step by step, taking really good local advice, working with really good local partners, and not being too optimistic, but trying to deal with the situation in hand and making sure that your reputation and your quality of product is always at the very highest.
Yeah, well, I would agree with John, but I'd also say that it can take some time to build a presence in these markets. It's also very important to communicate what we do, and I think the materials that we produce, getting them translated properly, and also finding imagery that also works in those local cultures. So we found we've had to adapt the material that we have in the way that we try and communicate.
We also at CBBC work very closely with UK Trade and Investment and deliver their portfolio of services for British companies in China. So the type of ways in which we can help companies is we can do market research, we can identify partners, we can arrange visit programs for companies, and that can be either on a solo basis, or we also can work with other organisations to arrange trade missions, so group visits to multiple cities in China. And a very large part of the work that we're doing at the moment is to get companies to understand the opportunities in regional cities across China. One of the most amazing facts is it has almost 300 cities with a population of more than 1 million people. And yet, if you went out onto the street out here, you probably find that people could only name maybe 2 or 3 cities. And this is one of the things that we've got to change in the UK. We've got to get more business people knowing that there are these very vibrant cities across the whole of China where great opportunities exist. And this means people getting off the beaten track and getting their backsides on planes.
People often ask if it's very different exporting to the emerging markets. And the answer is there are some differences. I mean, obviously there may be cultural differences, and UKTI can help with those. It may be more difficult to get contacts, to know who to speak to, and again UKTI can help. The distances are greater. There are a huge number of regional cities, for example, in China and India that companies need to penetrate. And again, it's really important that they get help. So we take large numbers of missions, for example, to these high growth markets. We really are there to help companies in every possible way.
Many companies are doing well, trading with the BRIC countries and with the rest of the world, of course. The weakness of the pound is helping. But as I heard when I spoke to Terry Schooler from the EEF, the manufacturers organisation, that isn't by any means the whole story.
Manufacturing is on the up because of a combination of both the competitive pound and I think the ability of manufacturing leaders to take advantage of the recovery. The competitive pound has undoubtedly helped since the latter part of 2008. But British manufacturing leaders have demonstrated the resilience. They've kept labour force and skills during that recession, and through the process of innovation, they've demonstrated that they can take advantage of these recovering and emerging export markets.
Now, which sort of manufacturer is doing particularly well? Which of your members is driving the revival?
I'm pleased to report that all sectors across manufacturing are performing well. That there's the possibility of a downside here in terms of construction. Construction came out of the recession slower than the other parts of the sectors, and of course it's patchy. But other than that, this is across the board. Difficult to highlight any particular part of the sector, but if I was to, I'd probably quote mechanical, heavy investment, mechanical engineering, perhaps linked of course to those growing, emerging and export markets.
How attractive do you think manufacturing is as an activity in its own right? Isn't it better to find a high value idea and then let someone else make it?
I think there are two issues there in terms of describing the attractiveness of manufacturing. I think one is we have to recognise that over the last couple of decades, manufacturing has not had a particularly attractive or good image, and I think it would be wrong of us not to recognise that. But I believe that is changing, and I believe it's changing quite strongly as a result, in part from that recession. I think the other point you make is of course linked to where manufacturing should take place. Manufacturing is a great wealth generator. About 53% of our exports come from manufacturing, about 70% of our research and development in business comes from manufacturing, and of course it's a double positive whammy when we export what we've got here. And I think there is a clear link, whether or not we wish to face up to it or not. There is a clear link that where research and development is undertaken in the main, that tends to be where the manufacturing or production takes place.
I mean, it can't be denied, though, that labour costs are so much cheaper in other countries, like in the Far East. And how can we compete on manufacturing if we're having to pay so much more for labour?
You're absolutely right. Labour costs, of course, are cheaper in the Far East and indeed in other parts of the world. But cost is only one aspect of competitiveness. Quality is clearly a big driver. Aftermarket or customer support, as we call it, and of course continuity of supply are also very important issues.
Do you see Britain as being just a location for small-scale specialists, or do you see large-scale manufacturing happening?
No, I don't see us just as being a place for SMEs, as we call it. We have a very strong SME market. I think it's fair to say that over the last 2 or 3 decades, we have seen a large number of British manufacturing assets being bought up, and therefore we do have an issue, and it would be wrong not to state it, that we do have an issue therefore that we do not have as many larger companies, say above 250 or 500 employees, as some of our other competitor nations. But as I mentioned a moment ago, we have a very strong SME base, and one of our challenges here in the UK is to grow that base and make those companies substantially bigger and stronger.
Well, Terry Schooler, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So from everything that we've heard, we can see that trading with the Bric countries offers massive opportunities, and that some companies are already reaping major rewards from large-scale and niche contracts. The message is that the business is there for the taking with the right help and guidance. Well, that's all we've got time for now, but if you'd like to find out more about any of the organisations that we've featured, then look at our website, thebusinesschannel.tv. Bye-bye for now.